Over the last few years, my knowledge and skills in filmmaking have massively changed. I started landing bigger and bigger clients. I invested all my money back into gear. I bought my first red camera. I built a film studio. And ultimately, I shot many terabytes of footage. And to make this all happen, I had to have robust behind-the-scenes systems that I know I can always trust. And one of these systems is my complete media workflow. When I first started back in high school, I only had 1 terabyte of hard drive storage inside my computer. No backups, nothing. And inside that hard drive, I didn't even have like a proper folder structure. I had file names like summer shoot, random stuff, cloudy windsurf, skate park. You get the idea. I was vulnerable in many ways, and this inorganization also prevented me from scaling my business. It didn't take too long when I had to face the consequences of my actions, and that was when I got hacked and I lost a bunch of pretty important files. That was the wake-up call for me, and from that point on I decided that I will always spend enough money, time and energy on my media workflow so this can never happen to me again. So here's how I do it. First step, before every shoot, I check all my memory cards if there's anything important on them that I haven't backed up yet. If there is, I back it up. If not, I just format the card and then it's good to go. If I know that there's gonna be offloading on set that day, I also make sure to bring my offloading drives and my laptop. After I arrive home from the shoot, the first thing I do is I plug in all my memory cards or hard drives if there was any offloading that day, and I make 3 copies from all the files. The first copy goes to my editing drive, where I edit all my current projects, and I always use SSDs for this. The second copy goes to one of my external hard drives, where I store the whole project, and the third copy goes to the backup of that external hard drive. While I'm editing, I always make sure to update all my files that are involved in that project, at least once a day or every couple of hours, depending on how fast I'm editing. And by updating, I mean making a copy of my editing drive to the external hard drives. When I finish the project, I make sure that I copied everything from my editing drive to my external hard drives, because in the next step, I'm deleting the whole project from the editing drive to make room for the next one. I only do that when I confirm that I have at least 2 more copies on my other hard drives, and that's it. Now that we have a brief overview of this whole process, let's dive in a bit deeper so I can explain everything in great detail. Let's start with preparing for a shoot. As I said before, I always format all my memory cards before every shoot, and I recommend everyone to do that in their camera, because that way you can't mess up anything with the formatting settings. A quick reminder for myself that I did this step is I rename my cards and my drives to something unique, and this is usually just the project's name that I'm currently shooting. Another thing that I always do is I check my camera's naming structure, because if I don't change this, many cameras will just produce the same file names as it already did before with previous projects. This can create a lot of headaches in post, because you will have multiple files with the same name. It makes it a lot harder to search for specific files, and it will also confuse your editing software. So yeah, I always make sure to use unique names for every project to avoid this issue. If I'm bringing offloading drives to set, I also like to prepare them at home, which means renaming, formatting them, and creating a basic folder structure. Since I work in Windows, I always format my drives to NTFS, but there are times when I know that I need to give this drive to an editor who edits on Mac, and at those times I format them to exFAT. But if you don't use Windows at all, just format your drives to APFS and then you're good to go. When it comes to the folder structure, I first create one folder with the project's name at the top, and the next step depends on if it's a 1 or a multi-day shoot. If it's a 1-day shoot, I create 3 more folders: footage, audio and assets. And if it's a multi-day shoot, I create a couple more folders with the exact shooting dates. I like to use year, month and day also, so that there can't be folders with the same name across different projects. As a director/DP, I always know what gear are we using that day, so I can easily create the subfolders for the footage and audio folder. There are many ways you can name these, but I like to start with the camera position/number and then the exact type. So for example, if we have 2 main cameras that day, I like to name them A-Cam Red Komodo 6K, Bcam Blackmagic Pocket Camera 6K, and this goes with specialty cameras or drones as well, for example drone, DJI Inspire 2, or with action cameras, Cam GoPro Hero 10. With audio, if we are using only one recorder that day with many different tracks, I usually name the folder to the recorder's name like Zoom 86 and then separate the tracks in post. But if you're using multiple recorders that day, I either pair them to cameras like AREC Zoom 86 or to a person who had that mic on set like Luke, Sennheiser G3 or something like that. If something comes up and we end up not using a camera or something just changes, I can easily change the folder structure, but I always like to set up everything to my best knowledge at home because it saves a lot of time on set. On set, when one of my memory cards gets full, I always like to put some tape on the end to indicate that there's still some valuable information on this card that hasn't been backed up yet, and yeah, it makes it quite hard to accidentally delete something. Offloading these cards are pretty straightforward. I just remove the tape, plug it in, and start copying everything to the destination folder that I already created. Depending on the shoot, sometimes I only do one copy so the card can go back to shooting as soon as possible, but if we have the time, I like to do the 2 copies at the same time for maximum safety. For the actual copying and offloading, most people just use their file explorers, which is fine, but if you want to add another layer of safety, especially on bigger shoots, you want to use a program that is specifically made for this purpose. Personally, I recommend Hedge, that's what I use, and this program basically double checks all the files when you're copying so you can't end up with corrupted files and a bunch of headache that comes with it. When the offloading and the backup is done, the tape gets removed, the memory card can go back to shooting, and the next step only comes when I arrive at home. First thing I do before even scrolling through the footage is I create the backups and folder systems. If I use an offloading drive that day, it's pretty easy because I just copy all the folders to the destination drive. If not, first I create those folders and then copy everything. I usually start by copying everything to my editing SSD, and when that finishes, I complete the folder system by adding a couple more folders. I add one called project files where I keep all my project files, Premiere Pro, After Effects, Audition, Photoshop, everything that I had to use for that project. One called assets where I keep all my editing assets that's not footage. One called music where I keep all my sound effects and music tracks, and one called export. Normally these are all the folders, but there might be some specialty projects where I add a couple more. If you feel like you need more and that it would help you with organization, feel free to add a couple more, but I'm usually fine with this many. After I'm finished with the folder system, I connect my 2 external hard drives and I copy everything to them. Remember, I still haven't opened anything, still haven't started editing, because I don't want to touch these files till I have at least 3 copies of them. After all 3 copies are done, I disconnect my 3rd backup drive so nothing can happen to it, and then I start importing everything into my editing software. I start by creating all these folders in my editing software as well, and then I just fill them up with all my files. When I'm editing, no matter what program I use, I always try to save as often I can, but I also have autosave turned on for every 10 minutes, so in the worst case scenario, I only use 9 minutes of work. As I said before, I also update my project files and my assets folder every couple of hours or at least once a day, and by updating I mean copying every change to my external drive as well. When I finish the whole project and the final renders are done, I again connect my 3rd backup drive and copy everything to it. My goal is to always have at least 2 copies of all my projects on 2 separate drives, so I technically don't need the 3rd one on my editing SSD, but I usually like to leave it there for as long as I can, just in case I need to jump back into the project. I also try to don't format my memory cards till I finish the whole project. There are obviously times where I can't do that because I'm already shooting the next one, but if I can, I do it. One thing I forgot to mention about this whole media workflow system is that there are 2 ways to store your files long term, and till this point I only talked about the first one, which is having multiple external hard drives and an SSD where you edit from. But there's also another way where you buy a massive NAS system and you run RAID configuration on it. Advantages to this system is that you don't need a bunch of separate hard drives because you have all your drives in one house. They are usually faster, so you can actually edit from them, you can connect them to the network, and then the whole office can edit from it, and you can run them in RAID configuration, which I don't want to get in too much right now, but it basically means you don't need 20 terabytes of storage for 10 terabytes of footage, because it's not a one-in-one copy. There are many different options, but what people do is they usually run them in like a 70 to 30% ratio, which means they can store a lot more footage on the same amount of space, but they also trade in some redundancy, because for example from an 8 drive NAS they can only have 2 drives fail before they start losing some files. Ultimately, these NAS systems are better in many ways. Most production houses use them, but they are a lot more expensive and most filmmakers don't necessarily need them. Even I haven't invested in one yet, but I'm planning to do that soon. For most filmmakers, this level of redundancy is absolutely fine. But if you don't feel safe, there's another level you can add, and I'm actually planning to do this in the next couple of months. And that is to create a third copy from everything and place it in another geological location, preferably another city or another country. This makes sure that even if your house burns down or something terrible happens to your neighborhood, you will still have one more copy somewhere else. And this also applies to NAS systems, but when people do it, they don't buy another NAS, they just buy these smaller external hard drives and they place them to another geological location. A similar solution to this is uploading your files to the cloud, which for a couple terabytes is actually a really good and cheap option, but when you have 50 to 100 terabytes or more, it can get really expensive. So overall, media workflow is kind of like your passwords. You can get away with weak passwords with just one copy of everything, but sooner or later you will pay for that, and that paycheck will be a lot bigger than what you would have had to invest to avoid it. Having just one copy of everything or a cheap media workflow is just not worth it if you want to run a professional business. But yeah, I think that was it for today. Let me know if you like this video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you guys in the next one.